Some of the books I read in October were absolute sweet treats, while others were a little bit scarier. Stay tuned to find out which was which. Of course, before we get going, I am going to cover my reading stats for the month of October, and I read 14 books in total, and I was really pleased with that because, as you know, if you've watched any of my videos before, then my average reading goal is 15 books per month, but I've been falling short of that and only reading about 12 per month for the last couple of months. So I do have some catching up to do as we go into the end of the year to make sure that I hit my target. However, quite a few of the books I've read have actually been longer, so quite a few more pages than an average kind of book, and therefore I still hit my kind of daily reading target, if you like. So in total I read 5,004 pages, which came to about 161 pages per day, which is pretty average. So again, I was really pleased with that. In terms of how I read the books, 2 were physical books, 6 were Kindle Unlimited. One book I partly read as a Kindle Unlimited, but the rest I listened to as an audiobook. I then had 1 audiobook, 1 ebook, 2 books that I got for free, and then 1 beta read as well. In terms of star ratings, I had 7 4-star reads, 3 3.5-star reads, and 3 3-star reads, and I haven't rated the beta book that I've read, and I'll explain more about that later. And then in terms of the genres, there was 1 contemporary, 2 erotic, 1 fantasy, 2 mafia, 1 MM, 2 monster, 1 Omegaverse, 1 paranormal, 1 sort of sci-fi romance, and 2 sports romances. So I was actually really low on the mafia and dark romance reads, and normally they make up at least half of the books that I read in a normal month. Although, a bit of a spoiler before we go into it, both of the mafia books that I read were my 3-star reads. So not a great reading month from a mafia, romance or dark romance perspective. Nevertheless, the first book can kind of be considered a dark romance, and that was Her Villain by S M LaViolette. Now mainly this is kind of an historical erotic romance, but I would also say it's very on the dark side because our hero in this one, David, is quite an interesting character. So first of all, this is the first book that I'd read by S M LaViolette, but I have read some other historical romances that this author has also written under the name of Minerva Spencer. Now this is book 6 in the Victorian Decadent series. We have a psychopath hero in David who is also kind of like an assassin for the Crowne, and then our heroine Calliope is actually a sex worker. So the premise of this one is that Calliope is a working girl and she works for a brothel. She's recently turned to this particular trade because her father passed away, and he didn't make provisions for her, and now she is desperate for the money, and what she's doing is saving up so that she can buy a ticket on a boat to take her to America, where she is planning to start a new life. The thing is, the brothel where she works is closing down because the owner has gambled all his money away. Basically, he can't afford to run it anymore, and so he's closing the brothel down, and that leaves Calliope in a very precarious position. And not only that, but all of her life savings that she had have now been stolen as well. And this is where David comes into the scene because, like I said, David is kind of a psychopath hero. By day, it looks like he kind of works in the financial sector, shall we say, dealing in stocks and trades, and is a very independently wealthy individual. But we come to learn that he also has kind of a secret life, where he is an assassin for hire and works for the government, doing you know, some shady dealing, shall we say. As a result, he kind of like doesn't really have any emotions, hasn't had any relationships with women before, but he does obviously like to have sex, and therefore often basically procures himself a working girl. And so it just so happens that the day this brothel is closing down, David comes to you know, purchase a girl. Calliope happens to be there. He offers her an evening for a pretty good wage, and she goes with him, and then she realizes actually this might help her out of a bad situation, and all she needs to do is convince David to let her stay a little bit longer. And she manages to do this, and they agree that she's going to stay for basically a few more weeks, and she's going to be able to earn enough money finally to get this ticket to go to America. And David is you know, is kind of on a bit of a deadline with his latest mission, and so thinks that this is perfect because she can like hang around, go with him to some functions, you know, satisfy his urges in the evening, and everything is going to be hunky-dory from there. But of course, Calliope gets very attached to David and starts to want something more from him, but we learn very quickly that David really is not emotionally capable of love, but he does start to have some very strong feelings and urges towards Calliope, which he is very puzzled by, isn't sure about, but kind of starts to realise that he isn't ready to let her go and kind of wants to be with her. I really like this one because it's a really great relationship between David and Calliope. I really liked how his character was written. I think he's got a great personality. There's some great scenes between him and Calliope, and really understanding kind of like how he's thinking, kind of what's going on in his head. But also there's a really good sort of backstory in here and plot in terms of what's going on with this particular mission he's on, and what's going on with the government, and you know, what happened to David in his past to make him the way he is. So I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a really well-rounded sort of book, and I really liked you know, the dark elements of this particular historical, and the fact that it was so heavily focused on BDSM, which really worked for this particular book. So I rated this one 4 stars and would highly recommend. Next up then, I read a book called His to Own by Ava Gray. This is book 1 in the Mafia Kingpin series. So therefore it's an Italian mafia romance set in New York. There's a bit of a sister swap that goes on in here. There is kidnapping, forced marriage, and also a surprise baby. And we are following Myceli and Alessia. Now, unfortunately, this was one of the 3-star books of the month. And I do have a lot to say, particularly in a reading vlog that came out recently. So I'll pop that in the description box down below if you want to catch up on my full thoughts on that. But essentially, Alessia is a mafia princess. She has a sister, and her father is trying to marry both of them off. And Alessia is supposed to be marrying somebody else, and her sister is arranged a marriage to Myceli. However, on the day that they're supposed to meet, they accidentally meet the wrong people. So Alessia meets Myceli, and her sister marries the man that Alessia is supposed to be marrying. Now, when Myceli and Alessia meet for the first time, they have an instant chemistry, instant attraction to each other. They really like each other, and as a result, Myceli really wants to marry her and not the sister. So he says to the dad, actually, is there any chance we can do a bit of a swap, and I'll marry Alessia and not the sister, if that's all right with you? And the dad refuses and says no, she's been promised to this other guy. Well, of course, Myceli's not going to take this lying down, and determines that he's going to make Alessia his. But meanwhile, Alessia doesn't want to marry the other guy either, and basically decides that she's going to run away. And when she does, she is attacked basically and almost killed, and then Myceli has to kind of rescue her, and in doing so he rescues her, takes her back to his apartment, and then decides he's going to force her into a marriage with him immediately in order to make sure that she is protected, but also so this other guy can't get his hands on her. Like I said, this was only a 3-star for me. On paper it sounds like it would be right up my alley, but it wasn't particularly well executed. And like I say, if you want to know my full thoughts on that, I would recommend you watch my reading vlog to find out more. So next up, I picked up For the Fans by Nyla K, and this is one of the longer books that I read this month. It was 546 pages, and I have to say that I've started to notice that books are getting much longer than they used to, and I don't know if it's anything to do with the rules around Kindle Unlimited and how much authors are now being paid for books and paid by the number of pages that people read, but I feel that books are getting particularly long, and this one was a long book at 546 pages. Now, I'd heard some really great things about this, and in fact this was a book that had been recommended by a couple of booktubers that I follow, particularly More to Mary, and I pulled this one out of the prompt jar, and I have to say I did really like it. It's probably one of my favourites of the month, but still I only rated this one 4 stars, and I'll explain a little bit more about why that was. Now, this is an romance. It is a taboo romance. It's basically 2 stepbrothers. They're in close proximity together. They do start off as enemies and become lovers, and it's also sort of a bisexual gay awakening for this couple, and I would definitely say it's bordering on an erotic romance. We are following Kiran and Avi in this one, and like I say, they are basically step brothers, because at the start of this book, Kieran's father and Avi's mother get married and they end up moving in together, which basically means the boys, teenagers at the time, end up having, you know, 2 bedrooms in the same house, and they share a bathroom as well. Now immediately Kiri takes an instant dislike to Avi, and they therefore become like enemies to lovers in a way. Avi doesn't have any problems with Kieran, but Kieran really has issues with Avi. He's quarterback of the football team, and he's very much portrayed as you know, the typical sort of high school jock. Meanwhile, Avi is more artistic. He, you know, is portrayed very much as somebody who doesn't really have any clear sort of like future direction. He is an artist and really likes drawing. He isn't particularly good at school, and you know, he is struggling with a lot of things, but you know, takes to you know, smoking weed and things like that in order to kind of relax him. So he's described very much more of a kind of laid back sort of chill kind of guy with no sort of direction, but also very kind of arty and things like that. And so Kieran and Avi really are kind of almost like opposites attract, and not at all people that you would expect to be friends. And this goes on basically through their kind of high school life, and then they're going off to college. Now Kieran is desperate to go off to college. He really needs to get away from home, and he does have a particularly bad relationship with his father, so he cannot wait to go to university. The thing is, Avi ends up at the same university as him, and Kieran is not too happy about this. But still, they maintain their distance and they live on opposite sides of campus, and for the most part, their paths don't cross. Until Kieran's father loses his business and then starts to really struggle for cash, because before this, they were quite cash rich and had a lot of luxuries, and now the business has crumbled. They are struggling to make ends meet, and so there is a massive financial burden placed on both Kieran and Avi from a schooling perspective, because now they're going to have to try and fund their own school and accommodation and everything else. So that while both of them have kind of got scholarships to these schools, obviously living accommodation, food and all of that sort of stuff is going to cost them a pretty penny. And so what happens is Avi comes up with this scheme to start a for the fans account, and start to, you know, video himself doing things and posting them online, and he starts to get a really good following, and you know, making quite good money out of this. And meanwhile, he's also got a friend, a lady friend who does this as well, and her following has suggested that maybe she joins forces with another For the Fans content creator, and so Avi agrees to do this with his friend, and then they decide to rope in Kieran, because obviously Kieran also needs the cash, and have a bit of a threesome in this video. Now, the chemistry between Kieran and Avi is so electric and so intense that people really pick up on this and start to ask for more content with Avi and Kieran in it. Now, Kieran is horrified. He doesn't want to take part in this at all, and he is really resistant at first. But over time, slowly, surely, over time, Avi starts to win him around, and Kieran participates in more and more scenes with him, and obviously the fans go wild. They start to earn really good money, and now basically they start to have this relationship together where Kieran won't admit his feelings or the fact that he's actually gay. He just keeps saying he's only doing it for the money, for the fans basically. But over time we start to kind of like break down Kieran's defences. Now, this was a very powerful story, I will say that, because Kieran, we find out, has gone through an awful lot in his life, is really resistant to the idea that he might be gay, and he has to really take a lot of time to come to terms with this about himself and what it means for his football career. Avi, meanwhile, is fully embracing his sexuality. He's known for a long time that he's bisexual, and why it's the first time he's been with a man, he, you know, is much more accepting of where he is with himself, like emotionally and mentally as well, although he also has been through some trauma, but not quite as much as Kieran. And so I felt that this story was really, really powerful. These characters were amazing. You really wanted these two to get together, and the chemistry was off the charts. This was a really, really spicy but sexy book, and I would highly recommend. However, I only rated this one 4 stars, and it would have been higher, but I did feel like this book was just a little bit too long for me. Now, on one hand, you could argue that Kieran has got a lot to work through, therefore we needed the space on page for him to come to you know, full realization of who he was and acceptance, and go through the steps that he needed to in order to kind of like repair his relationship with his father and come to terms with what was going on with Abby, and kind of admit to the world who he really was. So in some ways we did need that time and space. The thing was, for me, I felt like the first part of this book had so much momentum, and like I said, was super sexy and spicy, that by the time we got to the last part where Kieran was really trying to figure himself out, I felt that it really kind of then plateaued in terms of the enjoyment level. So by the time we finished this book, I felt like it was left a little bit lackluster in how it turned out, and we didn't really have this really good kind of like show-stopping ending, if you like, which I really wanted to see between these two. It kind of just like plateaued out, and we kind of like rolled all the way through it. So absolutely brilliant. I think brilliant writing, had me hooked, but like I say, just a little bit too long for me. So then I moved on to the second mafia romance, which I read last month, which was Dark Prince by Casey Crowne. This is book 1 in the Chicago Bratva series. So of course this is also another mafia romance. It's Russian mafia and Irish mafia combined, because our hero is Bratva, but our heroine is an Irish mafia princess. And this is also an age gap forced marriage. It had a fairy tale retelling sort of vibe about it, because we have this very wicked, evil stepmother character in this book. And also in this one, like the last one, there was a surprise baby. Unfortunately, this one was another disappointing read at just 3 stars, and you can see again my full thoughts and comments on this one in the reading vlog that I did last month, so definitely go and check that out. But in short form, we are following Luke and Maura. Luke is our Bratva hero, and he is basically arranged in marriage to Maura, but Maura has no idea that this is even happening. Like I said, she's got an evil stepmother who's kind of currently controlling the Irish mafia. She basically forces her to go to a party one evening, but it turns out it's not a party at all, it's actually her wedding, and she is pretty much forced to marry Luke. And then basically she goes to live with him. Their relationship does start off pretty quickly. Again, this is kind of very sort of insta-lovey or insta accepting of the relationship between them, and then we start to figure out what the intention is of the evil stepmother, why she's forced this marriage upon her stepdaughter, and everything else that's going on. I found the heroine in this one really, really irritating. She was one of those kind of heroines that didn't listen at all to her husband. She kept sneaking out of the house without telling anyone where she was going, and therefore she kept putting herself in danger, and this happened repeatedly. And so I just didn't like that. That didn't sit well with me at all. And like I say, again, this one was a little bit lackluster, and definitely not a series I'll be carrying on with in the future. So next up then, we've got A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane, and this is book 1 in a Gathering of Dragons series. I've had this one on my bookshelf for a while. As you can see, I bought the physical copy when I heard Crystal from Crystal's Bookish Life talking about this one. There's a particular scene in here that she described, and as a result I was like, I have to read that book. So I did, but I had been putting it off because again, this is another very long book. This one sits at 534 pages, and not only that, but as a physical book it's actually quite small. It's a very small font, and actually was quite difficult to read this one. If you've not read this one before, then this one is basically a romantasy, so it's a fantasy romance, a captive, kind of an arranged marriage or a marriage of convenience. These two go on a road trip, and I would also say that these two are enemies to lovers. So in this one we are following Mack and Ava. Now, I don't tend to read a lot of romantasy. I tend to steer away from them only because I feel like when we get into these types of books, there is a lot of world building that goes on, usually a lot of place names, a lot of characters, and this one was no different. I felt it took me quite a few chapters to get into this one in terms of understanding more about the world, where they were, who everyone was. But once I'd read the first couple of chapters, I started to settle into this one. We are in a world which obviously has different kingdoms. In the past, a destroyer has been and laid waste to the world, and as a result, the people that are left have kind of formed these alliances between these different kingdoms. Now, Maddox is an heir to his particular kingdom, and he's recently discovered that his parents have been unalived, and he is absolutely heartbroken but also furious that this has happened, and determines he's going to seek revenge on them. And of course, he's also now that they've passed away, he is now kind of next in line to rule, but in his society people have to kind of vote for him, kind of like endorse his leadership, if you like. So really at the start of this one, everyone refers to him as their kind of king, if you like, but he hasn't been officially sworn in. He obviously goes to this kind of like ruling council to find out what actually happened to his parents, and they've determined that it was like this terrible incident that happened, and that their deaths were completely justified. Maddox, however, has a completely different opinion of this and decides, like I say, he's absolutely going to take revenge. Now, there is one particular family who's responsible for this, and this is where we meet Ava, because Ava is part of this sort of family where the father and the brothers are all extremely evil. They are very manipulative, plotting and scheming. They ultimately want to rule over all of the other kingdoms and don't really want this alliance. They want to be in control. But in their sort of society, there is a lineage of women who are really supposed to be the queens. And Ava, our heroine, is part of this lineage. So technically, if people knew that Ava existed, she would ultimately become their queen. But of course, the evil father and the brothers don't want anyone to know about their sister, because then they would obviously lose their own power. So they have basically kept her sequestered away, totally kept her secret, and basically imprisoned for the majority of her life, because they, like I say, they want to keep her secret and make sure that they hold on to the power for themselves. Of course, Ava is, while physically weak, is mentally very strong, and she's been biding her time, she's been learning all she can, and she's been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now, this moment comes when she's actually going to be shipped off to a different location. Maddox intercepts this kind of like this sort of caravan, if you like, who are taking her to a different place, and he basically takes her captive for himself, and he's like, aha, I've now found you, you are the perfect leverage for revenge, because basically you know, I can destroy your family if I have you. And she sort of says, actually my father and my brother don't actually care about me at all, let me enter an arranged marriage with you, therefore you will become king, I will become the queen, we will get the revenge that we need on my family, and you're strong enough to basically to protect me while I'm basically you know, fulfilling my destiny to become queen of this land. And she very, very much begs Maddox for help, and Maddox very reluctantly agrees to this deal, because he knows that what she's saying makes a lot of sense. However, he does not trust her at all, very much thinks that she had something to do with his parents' death, and is determined to keep her at arm's length. But then, of course, after picking her up, he needs to take her to safety, back to his people, so that they can get married and he can be crowned king, and they can start their plot. And so then they set out then on this very treacherous journey to evade their enemies, while they are kind of like making their way back to where he is. So in the very barest terms, this is kind of what the story is about. Obviously there's loads more to this. It's a romantasy, so it's very, very kind of rich in detail, in story, in all the different factions and what's going on, all the political intrigue. What I was really interested in here was this epic love story, because I felt, or I'd heard such great things about this book, where Ava and Maddox would get this like really, really kind of like epic love story. And he's so sort of, he's such a powerful kind of person. He's so filled with sort of rage and like desire for revenge, but he's also sort of very passionate, and he comes to really like Ava, really want to protect her. And yeah, as we get towards the end, definitely things happen in this book, which should definitely have given me this feeling of, you know, this epic kind of love story. However, again, a bit with for the fans. For me, this book was just a little bit too long, and because I'm not a massive romantasy reader, I felt like some of the world building dragged quite a bit. Like I say, the font in here was really small. Maybe I would have done it more justice had I listened to this as an audiobook or read it on my Kindle, so I could make the font a little bit bigger and it would have been easier for me to read. But still, I felt that this book was slightly too long for me. Slightly too detailed, and although this was a good love story, I didn't think the payoff at the end was worth the pain of getting to it, and so as a result I did like this one. I definitely would recommend it, but again, rated this one 4 stars. Next then, I read Salt Kiss by Simone. This is book 1 in the Lioness series. This is another erotic romance. It's a bisexual awakening. We've got a virgin main female character in here, as well as a main male character. We have a BDSM romance, a bodyguard romance. It revolves around a sex club. It's a love triangle, and eventually this will be a polyamorous relationship, I believe. I bought this book as an ebook, and in this one we're following 3 main characters: Mark, Isolde and Tristan. So the first, I would say 60% of this book very much focuses on Mark and Tristan. Mark is a very interesting character. He's definitely a morally grey hero, and we know that he used to be in the CIA. He has retired from the service, but now deals in information. So he basically runs the Lioness Sex Club, where very, very wealthy, influential, powerful people kind of frequent. And he doesn't charge for people to be members of the club in actual cash. What he does is he expects payment in information. And so basically he uses the information to do a lot of things. He knows a lot of things, and he uses that to his advantage. So he's a very, like I say, morally grey, very kind of dangerous man who knows a lot of things and is not afraid to blackmail people if they want to. He's also got some dark desires in the bedroom, and like I say, he owns this sex club, and he is definitely a massive fan of BDSM, and he particularly likes dominating people, and I would also say he is a bit of a sadist as well. So at the start of this book, he is looking for a new bodyguard, and he decides that Tristan is going to make the perfect bodyguard. Tristan has also been in the military. He is just leaving the service, is looking for a job, and basically Mark employs him to be his bodyguard, and this is kind of a 24/7 kind of situation. He lives in the sex club in Lioness, where Mark also lives, and needs to be basically at Mark's beck and call 24/7. Now Tristan is a virgin at the start of this book. He's known for a long time that he is gay, and is very attracted to Mark, and he's also very kind of like sexually inquisitive as well, and he's very interested in what he sees going on at the club, because, you know, with him being with Mark all the time, he obviously gets to see all the different things that are going on in the club. He then also learns that Mark has previously had a relationship with his previous bodyguard, and Tristan kind of propositions Mark and says, hey, since we're spending all this time together, I actually really like you. I'm prepared to be your submissive if you want to use me like that. And Mark at first says, you don't really know what you're getting into. You know, I'm not sure this lifestyle is for you, and I'm not sure that I am the right partner for you. But Tristan kind of insists, and there was a moment where they both finally succumb to how they feel, and then they enter into this kind of like I said, this BDSM dynamic where Mark is very much dominating Tristan, introducing him to loads of different new things from a sexual perspective, but they're also maintaining this kind of relationship where Tristan is ultimately his bodyguard. Now Tristan goes into this very naively, and then starts to learn and hear that Mark may be not available because there is a wedding coming up, and then he figures out that Mark is actually going to be married. Now what we knew from the prequel of this series, Salt in the Wound, was that Mark is actually arranged in marriage to Isolde, and there's sort of been a 4-year grace period where they've been waiting for Isolde to finish her studies, but the time is fast approaching when Mark is supposed to basically marry Isolde, and when Tristan learns of this, he's absolutely heartbroken, because by this point he is massively falling in love with Mark, and now Mark throws him a very bitter pill, because not only does Tristan find out and is devastated, Mark gives him the task of going to get Isolde from an island where she currently lives and bring her back to America safe and sound. And they're going to do this via a super yacht, a luxury yacht basically, and they're going to sail the Atlantic Ocean. So then Isolde and Tristan are now going to be in close proximity together for a period of about a week, and things are going to go from there. So like I said, the first 60% of this book very much focuses on Mark and Tristan, and then the final part of this book very much focuses on Isolde and Tristan. And then there's a big cliffhanger at the end of this one, because this is the first part of a duet. And obviously when we start the next duet, we are going to be moving into the situation where Mark and Isolde are going to be married, and I guess we're going to see more of them, but also start to figure out how Tristan is going to fit into this dynamic overall. So I really like this one. I'm going to reserve full judgment until I've read book 2 in the duet, but for now I've rated this one 4 stars. Next up then we have a super sweet romance, and this is Partying with Pixies by Hazel Mack. This is book 3 in the Haven Ever After series. I've really been loving this series so far. It's a paranormal, small town kind of romance, and in this particular one we're basically following Aloe, who is a gargoyle, and Miriam, who is a pixie. This is a fated mate, single dad, small town, monster romance, and is absolutely delightful. I've spoken about this series before. It very much reminds me of that TV show A Town Called Eureka, because instead of this town being full of geniuses, this is a town full of monsters, but it's such a lovely, sweet, small town, and all of these characters are really, you know, fun, bubbly sort of characters. Now, like I say, Aloe in this one is a gargoyle, and he has a son, and so he's our single dad. The thing with gargoyles is that they don't have heartbeats until they meet the person that they're fated to be with, and then their hearts start beating. Now, the story with Aloe is that he previously had a mate, and he was married, then she got pregnant and had the child, but she didn't want to be a mother, and in the end they basically split up, and Aloe has basically been bringing up his son by himself. As a result, his heart has stopped beating, and you know, he doesn't think that he's ever going to meet someone again. That is until he moves to the town of Ever and meets Miriam, our pixie. Now, she instantly likes him. They become great friends, and she really helps in the early days when, you know, Aloe is really grieving like the loss of his partner, and also trying to raise his son kind of by himself, and as a result Miriam and Aloe become great friends. But Miriam absolutely is in love with Aloe and has been for a long time. She's just been biding her time basically until he wakes up, comes to his senses, and realizes that she is the one for him. But of course he is you know, he doesn't want to leap into love again. He's really concerned about his son. He wants his whole focus to be on his son, and not to you know, be with somebody else. But slowly and surely over time, and 5 years have passed, so he's known Miriam for 5 years, his son's a little bit older, and slowly and surely, you know, it's now time for their relationship to turn into a little bit more, and that's exactly what happens in this book. And what I really liked about it as well is that it is kind of like revolves around the theme of Halloween, because Miriam in this one is kind of planning a Halloween sort of party around town, and she ropes obviously Aloe in and his son into kind of helping her to do that, and that's kind of like the event, if you like, that kind of brings them together. So like I said, this was a really quick short read, absolutely delightful. In fact, I listened to this one as an audiobook, and it was narrated by Mason Lloyd and Mia Barron. And in terms of my rating, I gave this one 3.5 stars and rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads. Now, you might be surprised by that, because obviously I've just said some really lovely things about this book and was smiling the whole time I was talking about it. But the reason for my 3.5 rating was more because you know, it was such a quick and short read. There's not a lot of substance in this story. It was very delightful to read, and you know, you really wanted this couple to be together. But for me, I like a slightly grittier, darker sort of tale, so I absolutely would recommend this story. I'm sure loads of you would absolutely love it if you like a, you know, a sweeter small town sort of romance with a, you know, with a fun paranormal sort of theme. Still on the monster theme, I then picked up Cottonmouth by Naomi Lucas, and this is book 6 in the Naga Bride series. This is, like I say, a monster romance. Our main hero is a Naga, so he's a hybrid between a human and a snake. This one is fated mates, captive situation, close proximity. We've got virgin, hero and heroine in this one, and also a surprise baby. Now, I've absolutely been loving the Nog Brides series so far. I think the whole setup is absolutely fantastic, and in this one we are following Syasku and Vivian. Now, at the end of book 5, or during book 5, Syasku, who's a Cottonmouth sort of Naga, he was captured by the humans on the Dreadnought, and he is now in captivity on the Dreadnought, being experimented on by their scientists. And this is the setting for this book. This is slightly different from the other books in the series because the majority of this book is set on the Dreadnought, with Syasku very much in captivity and being treated very, very badly by human scientists. And then the heroine in this one is Vivian, and she is actually the daughter of Laura, who was the heroine from the previous book, and she happens to be on this, you know, the science team who is basically doing the experiments on him. However, obviously their methods don't sit right with her, and she is appalled by how badly Syasku is being treated, yet also very frightened of him, because at the end of the day he is a huge powerful Naga who has to be constantly drugged and restrained in order to keep him in check. The thing is, as we've learned in this series, the Nagas give off this pheromone which basically makes them irresistible to human women, and it's not long before Vivian very much falls under his spell and kind of gets infected, if you like, by his pheromones, and then becomes extremely attracted to him, and she can't figure out, you know, what's going on and why she's suddenly got these feelings, and she very much fights them to start off with. Also, fate doesn't particularly work in their favour to start off with as well, because she also happens to be the daughter of the commander of the Dreadnought, who's a horrible person. He doesn't treat his daughter very well at all, and you know, she's removed from the science team, so she can't interfere anymore with what's going on. So Syasku, though, obviously also still really likes Vivian, and when they try and bring other women to him to see what will happen, because they're very much experimenting with this sort of pheromone and trying to figure it all out, he's obviously rejecting all of these women, although they're all, you know, start to fall all over him and want to be with him. But he's like, no, Vivian is the only one for Syasku, and is going to hold out for that. Realising this, they then decide to stick Vivian with Syasku into his cell and kind of pretty much leave her there and like see what happens. And things go from there, and they're very much played off against each other, because obviously they're going to develop a very close connection, they're going to start having feelings for each other, and they're not going to be able to resist the sexual chemistry between them. Because of this, it's very easy for Vivian's father and the scientists to emotionally blackmail Syasku and threaten her life unless he complies with some of their wishes. And so we see him in a very difficult situation where this very proud kind of warrior Naga is literally chained to a wall, is left completely helpless and unable to protect the woman that he loves. I thought this was absolutely fantastic installment in this story. I really liked it, really wanted this couple to be together, and was constantly trying to figure out how are they going to get out, how are they going to get out of this really bad situation they're in and make it back to the planet, and if they do, what does that mean for them and for the other snakes and humans that we've come to know and love as well. So a fantastic installment, really enjoyed this one, also rated this one 4 stars. Next up, I picked up In Desperate Ruin by Elena. This is a standalone, so not part of a series, and I picked this one up because it was one that I put out of my TBR jar and was a book that someone had recommended to me. However, that person had chosen to be anonymous, so I'm not exactly sure who recommended it, but if it was you, thank you very much for the recommendation. This one is a contemporary kind of forbidden romance with the best friend's dad, so it's also a bit of an age gap. They're in close proximity because they happen to live together for the summer, and we are following Clementine and Arlo. Now, I partly read this book as a Kindle Unlimited download, but I also listened to part of it as an audiobook as well, and the audiobook was narrated by Eve Leonard and Javi Wilder. The setup for this one is that Clementine is due to be studying abroad for the summer, but her placement basically falls through and she's left with nowhere to go or nothing to do for the summer. Her parents happen to be traveling in Europe and someone is staying in their house, and so she's kind of like, you know, a little bit homeless as well. And so she asks her best friend if there's any chance she can stay with her and her dad for the summer. Of course, her best friend says absolutely, and the dad says, yeah, no problem. But when she moves in, things start to change because she is very attracted to her best friend's dad and he is very attracted to her, and now they're living in close proximity together. To make things worse, her best friend has a boyfriend and she spends a lot of time with him. So she's hardly ever in the house. She's often out and spending the night with her boyfriend. And so our main characters in this story end up spending an awful lot of time together and doing lots of kind of like domestic things together around the house, cooking, sharing meals, and watching TV and all of that sort of stuff. So they start to form this very, very close relationship. Of course, because it's a bit taboo, there's a bit of an age gap. It is the best friend's dad. They try and resist for as long as possible, but it's not too long before they are unable to resist anymore. The one thing in this one is that Clementine has had some trauma in her past and has experienced an SA. So if that is a trigger for you, check your trigger warnings before you go into this one. I thought it was handled really well in terms of the conversations around that, what it meant to her, especially as the person who attacked her is still kind of around and she has to see him from time to time. But so I really thought the author did a really good job in kind of handling that content matter and, you know, exploring how that would make the heroine feel and how she's going to kind of like confront her feelings for Arlo, and also how their sexual relationship is going to progress between them as well. Now, there was nothing to dislike in this book. It was, you know, it ticked all kind of the boxes for this particular kind of setup and sort of trope. However, I personally didn't think this was anything really special. I wasn't massively invested in these characters. I could pretty much take it or leave it, and as a result I rated this one 3.5 stars and rounded up to 4 on Goodreads. Next up then, I read A Code of Nights and Deception by Eliza Hampstead, and this was a beta read of this book. It's not actually due out until early 2025, so I'm not going to say too much about this one because I'm sure this book will go through a few more edits yet, and I'm also not going to give you my rating on this one because I don't think that would be fair until the book is finished. However, I will definitely be talking about this one again in early 2025 when this book comes out and give you much more details on it. For now, what I will say is this is a time travel romance with hidden identity and also close proximity. It's also a long book right now. It sits at just over 900 pages and so it is a pretty epic read. I also know that there is going to be more books in this series, and it's unclear yet whether this is going to be a duet, a trilogy, but definitely this one currently ends on a cliffhanger with more story to tell. So a lot of content to get through in this one. What I did really enjoy was the whole, you know, concept of this world. I think Eliza Hampstead has done a great job of kind of like creating this world, and we are transported back to the year 1401 and it's set in Warwick Castle, which is very entertaining for me because Warwick Castle is not too far from where I live. So to imagine what Warwick Castle would have been like back in the 1400s was definitely very interesting to read. Lots of very, very interesting historical data in here, and it's clear Eliza Hampstead did so much research for this one to kind of maintain some sort of historical accuracy. Also, our heroine in this one kind of disguises herself as a man so she can learn how to sword fight, and I think some of the sword fighting scenes as well when she's learning how to sword fight were some of the best parts of this book. And the relationship that she has with Henry, who is the person that's training her, they definitely have great chemistry together. And it's interesting to see how their kind of romance develops as well. Now, because it is set in the 1400s and it is fairly historically accurate, I would say, it also meant that there's actually a lot of dark content in here. Now, as a beta reader, I wasn't expecting quite as much dark content. It was just sold to me as a time travel romance. Clearly, the author will need to write some trigger warnings before this is actually published, but there was definitely a lot of triggers in this one, including violence, kidnapping, sexual assault, death in childbirth, torture, capital punishment, animal cruelty. Literally the list goes on. So definitely not for the faint of heart. However, I didn't feel any of it was kind of like done to be kind of like dramatic. Like I said, it all very much fit with kind of like the historical time that we're in. Yeah, very interested to see what the other beta readers thought of this one, and then the change that Eliza's going to make based on all of the feedback. So like I said, I'm not going to rate this one for now, but I'll definitely be talking more about this in the new year when we have a final version. Right, so I've come off the back of a very long book at this point, and I was waiting for Beg For Me to come out by JT Geisinger because it was due out, I believe, on the 26th of October. She was delayed uploading it to Amazon. I think she missed the Amazon cutoff, and as a result it was going to be pushed back slightly. So I'm still waiting for that one to come on Amazon so I can download that. So hopefully I'll be reading that in the month of November if she gets that sorted out. It meant that I was kind of between books. So when Poppy Aster released the next book in the Monster Gentleman's Club, in fact book 7 of the Monster Gentleman's Club, I pounced on this one straight away. This one is called Choosing the Demon. Basically this is a short story essentially. It's just 77 pages, so super quick to read. Read it in about an hour. I've really enjoyed all of the other books in this series, like just super fun, quick, easy erotic romances, and a really sort of great palette cleanser and very refreshing after the last couple of books that I'd read. So in this one we're following Nox, who is our demon, and Bree. So Bree's a human. She is at the Monster Gentleman's Club, and the Monster Gentleman's Club is this place basically where it's like a monster sex club, and then human women can go and be auctioned for the evening. The monsters can have their wicked way with them. The women earn a lot of money, and then at the end of the night their memories are wiped basically, and they're returned home. And this is to protect the monsters from the humans, because the human society still doesn't know that monsters exist, but you know, it's a win for everyone. Now, because of other things that have happened in other books, there is now an additional need for some sort of like security around the club, making sure that everyone stays in order, everyone is safe. No baddies can come and do anything to the patrons. And so now we have a team of demons who are now security for this club, one of which is our hero, Nox. So like I say, Bree is our heroine. She's there, she's put herself up for auction. The thing is, it was her friend that kind of talked her into this, and she wasn't 100% sure what she was getting herself into. She definitely didn't realise there was going to be monsters, and she thought it was just going to be a fun auction, maybe to go on a date or something. She didn't realise that the monster who bought her would expect some sexy time. However, that is what happens, but she isn't purchased by our demon Nox. She is in fact purchased by a werewolf, and he kind of drags her to the room to, you know, get the evening started. When she figures out who he is and what's about to happen, she freaks out, she kind of screams, she kind of runs out of the room. And she runs straight into Nox basically. Now, Nox is not a particularly nice looking being. He is a demon, so he's got kind of a skeletal face and red glowing eyes. Most people are absolutely petrified of him, don't want to go anywhere near him, but she basically realizes that he's security, believes that she's going to be safe with him, and runs basically straight into his arms and asks him to kind of protect her from this werewolf. Now, of course, the werewolf is, that's outrageous, she's mine, I paid for her fair and square, I want her back. But Nox is like, no, the lady says no, and so the werewolf has no choice but to kind of go off with his tail between his legs, almost literally. But now Nox has decided that she is going to be his. Here's a woman that is not scared of him at all. She ran to him with literally open arms, and now he is going to drag her to his lair and you know, have his wicked way with her and not let her go basically. And that's how this one plays out. So a really fun, quick, easy read, absolutely delightful. I always admire how much Poppy is able to pack into these books. It's just 77 pages, but she makes you really fall for these characters. Nox was absolutely amazing, and you definitely wanted Bree to fall in love with Nox, because here's our kind of like poor demon who everyone is normally afraid of, but not her, and he finally gets his HEA, so we love to see that. Now I'm absolutely loving having a quick short book to read, and I decided I'm going to squeeze in another one that's been on my Kindle for ages, and that is The Alpha's Revelation by Marlowe Roy. This is a part of the After End universe, but not one of her series. In fact, basically, if you sign up to Marlowe Roy's newsletter, you get this one as kind of a freebie, and it's just 62 pages, so another short, quick read. So in this one, we are following Rosemary and Samson. Samson is our alpha. He has recently escaped a bad pack and he's making his way to a better pack. On the way though, he gets kind of attacked by a bear and is now like quite severely injured and kind of lying at the near the bed of a river basically. Rosemary is our heroine. She is an Omega. And she lives by herself in a cabin away from society. She previously lived with her father and that's the only company she's really known for most of her life. But her father passed away a few years before, and now she's basically been on her own for a couple of years. Now, it's deliberate that she's kind of in this sort of cabin in the woods, if you like, because her father knew she was an Omega and was trying to keep her away from the Alphas, but he never really explained to her who she is and how all of this world operated and everything. And so she's kind of been left a little bit in the dark, but completely self-sufficient where she lives, all good there, until she's out one day and she comes across this alpha who's basically, you know, needing assistance, and she decides that she's going to take him back to the cabin, nurse him back to health. But she doesn't fully trust him because her dad scared her off being with other people basically, so she's also tied him to this bed. So it's not only a caretaking situation, but it's kind of this captive situation where when he kind of wakes up and he starts to get better, he's like, why am I strapped down? And she's like, because you might do something to me. And he's like, well, I definitely won't. And she's like, well, how am I going to trust you? And they start then to build this sort of relationship between them. And of course, because he's an alpha, she's an Omega, being in close proximity means that she's going to be pushed into her heat. And then she starts to have all these sort of sexual feelings she's sort of never had before, and he has to explain to her who she is, what an Omega is, being an Omega is all about. And so it's not going to be too long before these two succumb to their desires, and their relationship goes from there. So again, this was a fun, quick read, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. Next up, I picked up The Striker by Ana Huang, and this is book 1 in her new series, Gods of the Game. This is a sports romance. In fact, for you Americans, this is soccer, but for me in the UK, this is a football romance. And we have a hero who plays kind of in the Premier League, and a heroine who is basically a ballet dancing teacher. This is also a forbidden romance because she is the hero's rival's sister, and that is also close proximity. We are following Aster and Scarlett. So Aster is our football sort of star, and Scarlett is our ballet dancer. Essentially, Aster is the best football player of the generation. He's the number one basically, and he was playing for a particular team called Holchester. This is his hometown team. His dad is a massive supporter, and his dad basically has encouraged him to focus on football, to join this club, and he's kind of like, you know, constantly being there to support him for this particular team. The thing is, this all becomes a bit too much for Aster over the years, and he feels like his father cares more about the team than he does about him. He's constantly criticising him, saying he could do better. And eventually Aster decides he's going to transfer to a new team, Blackcastle, basically to get away from his dad. But he does this kind of mid-season without telling anyone, and so now he is hated by all of his old teammates who feel like, you know, he left them and abandoned them. All the fans hate him as well because they say that he's betrayed them, and of course his dad is not too happy about this situation. Still, he's moved to a new team. The thing is, another brilliant player on this team who is a defender on this team is Vincent, and they happen to be kind of like extreme rivals because Vincent plays for France in the World Cup and Aster plays for England in the World Cup, and previously Vincent faked a dive and as a result went on to win the game, and Aster very much sees Vincent as having cheated him of a chance to win a World Cup. And so these two are kind of like rivals in all sense of the word, and they hate each other. As a result, they don't play very well with each other, and because they don't play nicely together, Vincent refuses to pass a ball to Aster, which he could have scored a goal, and as a result, kind of like their team doesn't win the match and also doesn't win the league. So the coach is unhappy with both of them, let's put it like that, and he's like, right, we're going into the summer, you need to sort this out, we cannot have a repeat of this next season, we absolutely need to win, you know, and I can't have you fighting, you need to learn to work together. So he comes up with this plan where they're going to train together for the summer, and they're going to cross train in ballet, and basically Scarlett is going to be their teacher, and Scarlett happens to be Vincent's sister. Yeah, they're going to be trained together for the summer by Scarlett, who is definitely going to be off limits to Aster. The thing is, after only a couple of training sessions, Vincent is called to France because his father has had an accident and needs him to go and help him, and so Vincent goes off to France, and Aster and Scarlett are left unattended, unsupervised for the rest of the summer. And of course, now they're going to be in close proximity together, they're going to start developing a friendship together, and they do have amazing chemistry, and so yeah, it's not going to be too long before one thing turns into another, and of course they're going to have to keep this relationship secret, because although Scarlett has previously been a very famous ballerina, she's not particularly well known in the public eye, and Aster, the press are all over him and everything he's doing, so they're very much trying to keep their relationship on the down low, so they're not in the press, but also trying to keep it secret from Vincent so he doesn't fly off the handle, and obviously everything's hanging on the fact that Aster and Vincent can learn to work together. So this is going to end up being, you know, the driving force for the third act conflict in here. Now, as always with Ana Huang's writing, I did really enjoy it. I think her writing style is really easy to get into, her books really flow, her characters are always well developed. The thing is, for me, again, this book, it was super long, it was like 590 pages. Like I say, I felt like that was quite an investment of a read. If I'm going to read something that long, I want a really big payoff at the end. I want all of those pages I've read to be worth every minute of the ending. And for me, this ending fell a little bit flat. As a result, I gave this one 4 stars as well. So I did enjoy it, would definitely recommend it, but not a 5-star read. It was just too long for me, with not a big enough payoff at the end. I've got one more book to go, and in fact this is another novella length story, and this is Game Changer by Nikki Hall. This is a prequel to her Wild Card series, and is a sports romance, a football romance. In fact, the hero in this one is a quarterback, so it's set in college, and we're following Nadia and Derek. Now, this was a book that I got free when I went to Rare Edinburgh, because I met the author Nikki Hall, and obviously she had one of those postcards with a QR code, scan it to read a book. The idea obviously is that you read the prequel, and that will encourage you to carry on and buy books in the series. And I thought, again, I had a small portion of time where I could fit another one in before the end of the month, and like I say, I really want to get my read count up, but also balance off some of these much longer books that I read in that month. So I picked this one up. I thought it was okay. It was, again, a quick and easy read, nothing to write home about. There was not too much drama in this one at all, but I didn't think it was anything special, probably forgettable, and I don't feel any compulsion to carry on with the series. As a result of that, I rated it 3 stars. But still, like I say, quick and easy read. If you like sports romances, then, you know, you might want to give this one a go. Novellas are always hard, aren't they? Because obviously you don't have a lot of time for character development or anything. So that meant that this one was also, you know, kind of an insta-lovey sort of thing. Like I said, we're following Nadia and Derek. Derek's our quarterback of the football team at college. His main focus has always been on football. He's never really had time for a girlfriend, until one day he sees Nadia in his classroom, ends up sitting next to her, and they basically start this kind of romance and this friendship. She's one of those sorts of people that have sworn off dating jocks, because she thinks they're, you know, too much in love with themselves and don't treat women particularly well. But when she starts to get to know Derek, she realises what a great guy he is, and then he introduces her to her friendship circle. They start spending more time together. She understands how you know, much time and energy football takes up in his life, so it doesn't push him to spend more time with her, and so they fall into this very kind of nice relationship together. They're getting to know each other, they've got some chemistry between each other, but like I say, there's not really any drama between this particular couple. It's very insta-lovey, very kind of easy, and which I guess you'd expect for a novella, but like I say, didn't really have any grit to this one that made me think it was a standout or that I would you know, massively recommend this one. But like I say, if you like a sports romance and you want something quick and easy to read, then this might be for you. So there we go, that's all 14 books that I read in the month of October. I hope you got a sense of which ones I thought were tricks and which ones I thought were treats. And as we move into the month of November, I'm really looking forward to starting to tick off some of the books that are on my November TBR. If you haven't watched that video yet, then I will make sure there's a link to that one at the end. And I recommend you watch that one next to see what I'm going to be reading this month. As always, if you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me. And then all that's left to do is say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. And I'd recommend you head over there first. And I'd recommend you head over there next to... and I'm really looking forward to my reading. And I'm really looking forward to ticking up some of my... And as we move into the month of November, I'm really looking forward to ticking off. And as we move into the month of November, I'm really... So I've been talking for quite a long time now, but I've got one more book to go. And in fact, this is another novella. One more book to I think she is a really easy author. Going into the summer, you need to sort your shit out. In this one, we are following... Don't even know who we're following. Now, in their society, there is... So it's quite hard... it's quite hard to explain.